On August 6th, the feast of the Transfiguration of the Lord, something is revealed about the soul of your departed loved one that Saint Teresa of Jesus wrote down more than 400 years ago, and you need to hear it today. Listen closely. There's a scene in the Gospel that most Catholics have heard since childhood without ever understanding what it actually shows. Two men appear that afternoon on the top of a mountain and speak with Christ. Two men who had already died. And what they talk about has everything to do with your departed loved one, with what your loved one can do for you today, and with what you can do for them before dawn breaks on August 6th. Before we go any further, there's something worth saying out loud before God. Type this short line in the comments. My loved one speaks with Christ. Write it right now with your loved one's name held quietly in your heart, and watch how those 5 words turn into a prayer. Because what comes next has to do with a single Greek word that shows up in the Gospel of St. Luke, a word that most translations bury or soften, a word that changes everything you believe about what your loved one can do right now from where they are. Let's look at it together, slowly, the way a friend would sit with you in a quiet room. What follows has been kept for years for this exact day, for this eve of August 6th, and you need to hear it in full because each piece rests on the one before it. Belgrade, August 6, 1456. The city walls had held against the Ottoman army through 21 brutal days of siege. Sultan Mehmed II, the same sultan who had taken Constantinople 3 years earlier, pulled back defeated, his troops shattered. All of Europe breathed again. When the news reached Rome, Pope Calixtus II realized the victory had landed on the very date Eastern Christians had celebrated for centuries as the Transfiguration of the Lord. A year later, in 1457, the Pope signed the bull Inter Divinae Dispositionis and extended the feast to the entire Western Church. From that point on, August 6th carried a double weight. It's the anniversary of a battle won through prayer, and the liturgical memory of the moment Christ let his own glimpse, for a few brief moments, the glory that surrounds his own after death. Saint Teresa of Jesus knew this double root of the feast very well. She was born in Avila just 57 years after Calixtus III issued that bull, at a time when the Transfiguration was already a beloved feast across Castile. Her father, Don Alonso Sanchez de Cepeda, kept devotional books in the family library that told the story of the victory at Belgrade and walked through the gospel passage. Little Teresa heard that story as a girl, and that detail matters because years later, once she had become a barefoot Carmelite, when she returned to the scene on Tabor, she wrote about it with a depth that few writers have ever reached. But to understand what Saint Teresa of Avila saw in that scene, we have to walk through the gospel slowly, no rushing, the way someone steps into an empty church and waits for their eyes to adjust to the dim light. 6 days before the Transfiguration, at Caesarea Philippi, Christ asked the disciples a question that left them breathless. He asked who people said he was. Then looking straight at Peter, he asked who they said he was. Peter answered with a line still prayed every Sunday. You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And right then, for the first time since his public ministry began, Christ started speaking plainly about what was going to happen in Jerusalem. The suffering, the death, the resurrection on the 3rd day. The disciples heard those words with their hearts sinking. Peter actually pulled him aside to rebuke him, and Christ answered with a harshness that still stings today. Get behind me, Satan, for you are not thinking as God thinks. 6 days of heavy silence hung over the group. 6 days of the disciples walking behind their master without understanding why the Son of the living God had to die. 6 days of fear, of doubt, of questions nobody dared to ask out loud. On the 7th day, Christ chose 3, only 3, Peter, James, and John. The same 3 he had brought into Jairus' house when he raised the little girl from the dead. The same three he would later bring into the Garden of Gethsemane. He told them to climb with him up a high mountain to pray. Christian tradition has identified that mountain as Tabor, a rounded rise that sits like an overturned bowl above the plain of Esdraelon in southern Galilee. A few early church fathers pointed to Hermon instead. The Latin liturgy reads the scene as taking place on Tabor, and pilgrims have climbed it since the 4th century. The climb wasn't easy. Tabor rises about 1,286 feet, and its slopes are steep, littered with loose stone, the trees offering little shade. Christ and the three began climbing as evening fell, when the sun had started dipping toward the Sea of Galilee, the air still warm, but carrying the first hint of the coming cool. None of the three apostles said a word. They walked behind their master, sweat gathering at the back of their necks, their breath coming short. Saint Teresa of Jesus lingered on this moment in her writing. In the way of perfection, she insists on something most devout readers don't want to hear. Climbing the mountain with Christ costs something. It hurts. It wears you down. And Christ's closest friends are exactly the ones he leads up the hardest slopes. The climb up Tabor, she says in substance, is a picture of the entire life of a soul that seeks God. You climb in silence, legs aching, with no idea what waits at the top. And only once the climber has stopped demanding explanations does the light show up. The three apostles reached the summit with trembling hands and dry throats. The sun was sinking behind the hills. Christ stepped away a few paces to pray, the way he had every evening since his public life began. Peter, James, and John sat on a flat stone, backs against a tree, worn out from the climb. And sleep got the better of them. St. Luke says it plainly in chapter 9 of his Gospel. They were weighed down with sleep. All three of them dropped off, heads sagging on their chests, breathing heavy, while just a few feet away, the single most important event of their lives was unfolding. And then, without warning, two men came to speak with Christ. Two men appeared on the summit of Tabor that evening, next to the Master who prayed while the apostles slept, with no idea what was about to wake them. Out of every figure in heaven who could have come down that evening, it was these two. And out of every subject they could have raised with Christ, they spoke about exactly one. A subject none of the three apostles would have ever guessed they'd hear discussed between Christ and two dead men standing on a mountaintop. A subject that connects to your own departed loved one in a way most people have never learned to read between the lines of the gospel. Moses and Elijah, those are the names St. Luke writes in verse 30 of chapter 9. Moses, the one who led Israel out of Egypt. Elijah, the prophet of fire. Both appeared in glory and spoke with Christ. This is worth pausing on, because the choice of these two men carries a meaning that St. Teresa of Jesus read with the depth of someone who had spent whole nights in prayer before the tabernacle. Moses represents the law. He's the man to whom God handed down the commandments at Sinai, the one who led the chosen people through 40 years in the desert, the one who saw the burning bush, who wanted to look on the face of God and could only see his back because the glory of the Almighty would have struck down any mortal who dared face it head on. Elijah represents the prophets. He's the man who challenged the priests of Baal on Mount Carmel, the one who took shelter in the cave at Horeb and heard God pass by in the whisper of a soft breeze, the one who was taken up to heaven in a chariot of fire without ever dying, according to the 2nd book of Kings chapter 2. Law and prophets. The entire revelation of the Old Testament summed up in two men standing beside Christ that afternoon on Tabor. The scene is a living icon. It's as if the Father were saying from heaven, without words yet, that Christ is the fulfillment of everything Moses wrote and everything Elijah announced. But there's another detail Saint Teresa of Avila draws out with particular care when she comments on similar scenes in the book of her Foundations. These two men died in completely different ways. Moses died on Mount Tabor, looking out at the promised land he was never allowed to enter by God's own decree. The book of Deuteronomy, chapter 34, verses 5 and 6, says Moses died at the Lord's command, and that God himself buried him in a hidden valley in the land of Moab. And to this day, nobody knows where his grave is. A hidden death, a secret tomb, a burial place known only to God. Elijah, on the other hand, left this world a different way entirely. The second book of Kings, chapter 2, verse 11, describes him walking across the countryside with his disciple Elisha, when suddenly a chariot of fire with horses of fire came down and separated the two of them, and Elijah went up to heaven in a whirlwind. No visible death, no body to bury, no tomb to visit. Two completely different ways of leaving this world. Moses under the ground with no witnesses. Elijah swept away in front of a single man. And now, 14 centuries after Moses and 8 centuries after Elijah, both of them are standing on the summit of Tabor, alive, glorified, recognizable, speaking with Christ the way you'd speak with a close friend. This has an enormous consequence for what you believe about your own departed loved one. Pay attention here. It doesn't matter how your loved one died. It doesn't matter if it was a slow death in a hospital bed surrounded by machines. It doesn't matter if it was a sudden accident that left no time for anything. It doesn't matter if they died alone, with no one to hold their hand in a cold, silent room. The manner of death doesn't determine the state of the soul afterward. The scene on Tabor proves it. Moses died hidden away. Elijah was swept up in fire. Both stand glorious before Christ that afternoon. Both speak with him. Both are heard. Saint Teresa of Jesus came back to this point again and again when she wrote to widows who sent her heartbroken letters because their husbands had died without a priest, without the sacraments, without the peace they had hoped for. She answered them with a mother's patience, telling them God judges by the heart, not by the outward circumstances of the final moment. In one of her letters to Father Gracian, speaking about a nun who had died alone in the infirmary before anyone could reach her in time, she writes that God knows how to gather the souls of his own, even when no human being is there to witness it. And she adds something that comforts like few things do. The glory of God knows how to find his children, no matter the landscape where he finds them. There's another detail in the scene many Catholics skip right past. Saint. Luke writes that Moses and Elijah appeared in glory. That Greek word, doxa, is the same word used elsewhere in the Gospel for the radiance of the Father, for the brightness that surrounded the shepherds on the night of Bethlehem, for the splendor that will surround Christ when he comes at the end of time. The two dead men don't appear wrapped in fog or shadow. They appear in glory. They appear radiant. They appear sharing themselves in that same light pouring out of Christ's transfigured body. And Saint Teresa of Avila read in this a concrete promise for your departed loved one. The glory of the glorified saints is shared glory. It's borrowed. It's a reflection of Christ's own glory, the same way the moon reflects the light of the sun. If your loved one has already reached the house of the Father, they share in that same light right now. And if they're still finishing their purification before entering, that light is waiting for them at the end of the road, every bit as real, every bit as certain as it was waiting for Moses and Elijah the evening they climbed Tabor with Christ. There's still the most important part of the whole scene left to uncover. What were the two dead men actually talking to Christ about that afternoon on the summit? The full answer sits buried inside a single Greek word, one most translations hide or flatten into something weaker. And that word is about to change everything you believe about what your loved one can do right now from where they are. Do you know the word St. Luke chose when he wrote his gospel to describe the subject of that conversation between Christ and the two dead men? He chose it carefully. He chose it knowing it would be read for centuries, and that most people hearing it would never notice the weight it carried. The word is Exodus. Exodus, the same word that gives its name to the second book of the Bible. The same word used for the departure from Egypt, the crossing of the Red Sea, the chosen people's road toward the promised land. Exodus means departure, a going out, a march forward. And in the earliest Christian vocabulary, it also meant death. Death understood as the soul's great departure from this world into the next. Luke 9:31. Read slowly what the Greek text actually says. Moses and Elijah appeared in glory and spoke with Christ about his exodus, the one that was about to be fulfilled in Jerusalem. Modern translations tend to soften the word. They swap it for departure, or passing, or death, or transit. And while the general meaning survives more or less intact, something enormous gets lost in the process. The connection to the entire book of Exodus disappears. The echo of Moses leading his people out of Pharaoh's grip disappears. The long thread Scripture weaves from the first chapter of Genesis all the way to the cross of Calvary disappears. And most of all, the thing that matters most to you today disappears. The raw, comforting fact gets lost that the two dead men on Tabor are talking with Christ in the present tense about his own approaching death. The dead speak with Christ. The dead know what's about to happen on earth. The dead step into a company. Stop right here. Read it again slowly. The dead speak with Christ. The dead speak with Christ. The dead speak with Christ. And the one saying so is the sacred text of St. Luke, written under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit and honored by the Catholic Church for 20 centuries. No pious guesswork, no devotional invention meant to comfort grieving widows. The dead speak with Christ. And what do they speak about? Christ's death, the passion, the cup he was about to drink in Jerusalem just weeks later. Notice the tenderness of the scene. Christ was about to go down to Jerusalem to be handed over, whipped, crowned with thorns, and crucified. And that evening, on the summit of Tabor, the Father sends two men from heaven to speak with him about what's coming, to be with him, to offer comfort before the darkest hour arrives. The two glorified dead come down to console Christ. The two glorified dead speak with him about his own death. The two glorified dead know what's about to unfold in Jerusalem, and they come down with the Father's permission to take part in the drama of redemption from heaven's shore. Saint Teresa of Jesus returns to this scene in the way of perfection. She does it indirectly, speaking in general terms about how glorified souls take part in the mystery of the Church. In substance, she says the souls who dwell in the glory of the Father aren't passive souls watching from a distance. They're active souls. Souls that intercede, souls that speak, souls that take part in the life of the Church here on earth with a freedom and an effectiveness that God Himself grants them. And what she describes in general terms plays out with complete clarity in the scene on Tabor. Moses and Elijah aren't silent witnesses. They speak, they comfort, they participate. Now apply this to your departed loved one, directly, no detours. If your loved one has already reached the glory of heaven, or if they are finishing their purification in purgatory and drawing close to the end of that road, they have a voice, they have words, they have communication with Christ. Your loved one is speaking with the Lord right now about the things happening in your life, speaking to the Lord about your worries, speaking to the Lord about your health, speaking to the Lord about your children, your grandchildren, the debts weighing you down, the house that keeps you up at night, the neighbor's cancer you're afraid of catching yourself, the loneliness that sometimes swallows you whole on the couch in the afternoon. Your loved one is informed. Your loved one is paying attention. Your loved one is talking about you with Christ. Think about the enormous comfort that brings. When you ask your loved one to intercede for you, your words find an ear. Your voice arrives. The framed photograph on the dresser is a treasured keepsake, but the one truly hearing that prayer is somehow farther away and closer than that photo at the very same time. Someone who genuinely listens, who genuinely carries your name before the Lord, who genuinely takes part in heaven's conversation about the things happening in your life. And the Transfiguration on Tabor is the clearest scriptural proof of this teaching. This isn't some folk devotion floating free of any foundation. It isn't sentimental piety with no roots. It's a scene described by 3 evangelists, referenced by Saint Peter in his second letter, chapter 1, verses 16 through 18, and discussed by the Church Fathers since the 2nd century. Glorified souls speak with Christ. Christ listens to what they say. And in that dialogue between the dead and Christ, something in the destiny of the living gets decided. That's why August 6th is more than just a pretty date on the liturgical calendar. It's the day the whole church remembers that the dead speak and are heard. It's the day Christ lets us glimpse, for a few brief moments, the conversation constantly unfolding between him and those who have already gone. And it's the perfect day to lay your loved one's name on the heart of Christ with fresh confidence. Now comes what Saint Teresa of Avila added about this scene in a text almost nobody reads. One October afternoon in 1573, in the convent of the Incarnation in Avila, Saint Teresa of Jesus was dictating a chapter to one of her sisters, a chapter of the book we know today as the Book of her Foundations. She was 58 years old. She had been professed for 38 years, and for nearly a decade she had been receiving in prayer what she herself called mercies from the Lord, intimate communications that left in her soul a certainty no doubt could ever shake loose. That afternoon, she was writing about the souls of the nuns who had died in her convents. And at one point in the text, almost in passing, she writes a line most readers have skimmed right over for centuries, a line worth reading twice. She says, in substance, that the souls God has carried into eternal glory take part in the life of the Church here on earth with a freedom far beyond what we imagine, and that God uses them as messengers and comforters of His own. In the Book of her Foundations, she writes it with the plainness of someone who has seen the scene from the inside. Glorified souls are sent. Glorified souls speak. Glorified souls comfort. Compare this with the scene on Tabor. The parallel is exact. Moses and Elijah are sent by the Father to comfort the Son. They speak with him about the Passion. They are with him on the eve of his suffering. And that evening in Galilee sketches out the ordinary way glorified souls act within God's plan, saying, Teresa of Avila understood this because the Lord gave her to understand it in prayer, and she put it in writing so that widows, orphans, and parents who had buried their children would know what to expect when they asked their departed loved ones to intercede for them. There's a letter of hers to Father Gracian, dated in Seville in 1576, where Saint Teresa of Jesus recounts an intimate episode. A nun in the convent had died just days before, and that night, while Saint Teresa of Jesus was praying in her cell for the soul of the deceased, she understood with total clarity that the nun was already before the Lord, already interceding for the community. The line she writes to Father Gracian is one of the most comforting things that ever came from her pen. I understood that those who leave us keep loving us, and that by loving us they help us from where they are. Those who leave us keep loving us. Read that slowly. That's the whole of Teresa's teaching on the departed, in a single sentence. Loving is the primary activity of a glorified soul. Loving God first, with an intensity we can't even picture from down here, and loving their own second, with a love that's been purified of every trace of selfishness, every pettiness, every fit of impatience. Your loved one loves you now far better than they ever loved you in life. The pettiness is gone. The complaining is gone. The bad morning moodiness is gone. What's left is love, purified, aimed straight at you like an arrow of light cutting through the air until it lands, gently in your heart. And from that purified love, your loved one speaks with Christ, speaks with the Virgin, speaks with the saints, and in that conversation, your name comes up. Think about Moses and Elijah that evening. They had died centuries earlier. Their earthly lives had ended a long, long time before. And yet, within the Father's plan, they had a specific mission to carry out that evening on Tabor. They had been kept in the glory of heaven for that exact moment, to comfort Christ before the Passion, to walk with Him to the edge of the abyss, to speak with Him about the redemption about to unfold in Jerusalem. In the same way, your loved one now carries a specific mission God has entrusted to them. No life ends at death. No mission finishes with the final breath. The Father keeps His own with a purpose in mind, and your loved one, wherever they are, is carrying out today a task God has handed them with your name written into it. Maybe their task is interceding for a grandson who's fallen in with the wrong crowd and doesn't call anymore. Maybe it's watching over the health of your husband, still standing all these years after she left that winter that was too cold. Maybe it's pleading for the conversion of a brother who walked away from the sacraments decades ago and doesn't even say grace at the table anymore. Maybe it's simply being with you on those long afternoons when the house sits empty and the kitchen clock ticks louder than it has any right to. Saint Teresa of Jesus writes in The Way of Perfection that God doesn't waste souls. Every glorified soul carries out a service in heaven, and that service is usually tied to the bonds they carried on earth. A mother stays a mother in heaven, a father stays a father, a brother stays a brother, and that motherhood, that fatherhood, that brotherhood are lived out now from glory with an effectiveness we could never have suspected down here. That's why, when August 6th dawns over the roof of your house, when the bells of your parish ring out calling everyone to the Holy Mass of the Transfiguration, your loved one is going to be especially close to you, because it's their feast too. The feast of every departed soul who speaks with Christ. The feast of every glorified soul taking part in heaven's conversation on behalf of those still walking the earth. The feast of Moses and Elijah, and of your loved one alongside them, joined in that same service of love that comforts the Son of the Father through all eternity. Now it's worth taking a good, hard look at Peter and what he got wrong that afternoon on the summit, because his reaction carries a clear message for you too. The evening wind moved gently over the top of Tabor. You could hear the dry grass crackle under Christ's feet. The smell of sun-warmed stones still rose off the ground. And in the middle of that scene of light and silence, one of the three apostles woke up and saw what was happening. It was Peter. Mark, in chapter 9 of his Gospel, says all three woke up at once, but it was Peter who spoke. As always, the impulsive one, the one with the quick words, the one who said things before he thought them through. Peter looked at the light pouring out of Christ's body, looked at Moses on one side, Elijah on the other, watched the two dead men speaking with the Master in low voices, and instead of staying quiet, instead of kneeling, instead of letting the scene speak for itself, he blurted out the first thing that came to mind. "Rabbi, it's good that we're here. Let's put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah." Sneatingt. Mark, with an honesty only a well-informed evangelist would dare to include, adds a note that stings. He did not know what to say, for they were terrified. Peter wanted to freeze the moment. He wanted to build 3 shelters so the instant wouldn't end, so Moses and Elijah would stay put, so the light would linger. So the summit of Tabor would turn into a permanent sanctuary where the 3 apostles could live out the rest of their days without ever climbing down, without ever sweating again, without ever going back to the dust of Galilee. Peter wanted to pin the consolation in place, wanted to build it out of stone and timber, wanted to keep it from fading. Saint Teresa of Jesus talks at length about this error in the way of perfection. She calls it, in her own words, the mistake of a soul that tries to hold on to what God gives as a passing gift. In chapter 19 of that book, she explains that mystical consolations are like water flowing down from a spring. They come when the Lord sends them. They leave when the Lord pulls them back. And the soul that tries to hold that water in closed fists, or in a clay jug it hauls around and empties, or in 3 shelters thrown together in a hurry on a mountaintop, ends up with nothing but empty hands and the bitter feeling of having tried to possess something that was only ever on loan. Now notice how directly this speaks to the grief of a devout Catholic, your grief. Because badly handled grief tries to do exactly what Peter tried to do on Tabor. It tries to build your loved one a shelter of memories so they never fully leave. An altar on the dresser with the photograph and the flowers, a closed-off room nobody's entered since the funeral, clothes still hanging in the closet exactly the way they were left that last morning, glasses sitting on the nightstand nobody has the courage to move, and those gestures, look closely, carry something good and something dangerous, both at once. The good part is the love itself, the love that resists forgetting, the love that wants to keep touching, smelling, seeing, hearing that loved one somehow, some way. That love comes from God, and God blesses it. Saint Teresa of Avila would never tell a widow to throw away her dead husband's letters, nor a mother to clear out the room of a child she lost. Grieving love has its own rightful place in the Christian heart, and God understands it completely. The dangerous part is trying to hold the soul in place, trying to stop them from rising, trying to build 3 shelters that let you keep seeing them the way they were, without letting them become what God is doing with them right now. When a family member keeps everything untouched for years, when nothing is ever allowed to move, when they talk about the departed as though they were still in the next room, something inside them is clinging in a way that helps neither the living nor the dead. The living one stays frozen in the pain. The dead one, already being purified by God, feels an earthly tie still weighing them down. Saint Teresa of Jesus wrote in one of her letters to Doña Luisa de la Cerda, the Duchess of Alba, something worth keeping close during these hard days of grief and absence. She told her in substance that loving someone who has died means letting them walk toward the Father instead of pulling them back with the tight clenched arms of memory. Loving the departed means letting them go with a calm, settled confidence. Loving the departed means letting Tabor's light wrap around them instead of building them a shelter of your own, down here in the cold flatland of your tears. And here's the key to it all. You can only truly let go of what you know is loved by someone else. You can only let your loved one go if you truly believe Christ is holding them. You can only let go if you know the Father's hands are far steadier than yours for carrying them into glory. And that certainty is exactly what August 6th brings with special force. Because in the Transfiguration, you see, with the eyes of the soul, that Christ holds His own, sustains them, wraps them in His light, sends them out and gathers them back according to His wise and good plan. The cloud that settles over Tabor is about to wrap everything up in an instant. It's about to wrap around Christ, around Moses, around Elijah, around the 3 trembling apostles, and in a way, it's about to wrap around your loved one and around you too. Because that cloud has a specific name in Scripture and a very long history that most Catholics today have never heard explain this calmly. 1,300 years before the Transfiguration, the Hebrew people were walking through the Sinai desert. They had come out of Egypt following Moses, and above them, according to the book of Exodus chapter 13, went a cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. The cloud guided them. The cloud protected them. The cloud wrapped around the people and told them when to walk and when to stop. When the cloud settled over the tabernacle, Israel made camp. When the cloud lifted, Israel started moving again. That cloud has a name in Jewish tradition. It's called the Shekinah. It's the Hebrew word for the visible presence of God among His people. When Moses received the commandments at Sinai, the Shekinah covered the mountain in thick smoke and thunder, according to chapter 19 of Exodus. When Solomon consecrated the temple in Jerusalem, the cloud filled the building so completely that the priests couldn't even stand there to carry out their ministry, according to chapter 8 of the first book of Kings. And when the archangel Gabriel announced to the Virgin Mary the birth of the Savior, St. Luke writes in chapter 1 that the power of the Most High would overshadow her. That shadow is the Shekinah, the same cloud, the same enveloping presence of God. Now go back to Tabor. St. Matthew chapter 17 verse 5 writes that while Peter was still talking about the three shelters, a bright cloud covered them all. Covered them. The Greek word is episkiazousa, the same root saint. Luke uses for the moment of the Annunciation, the same cloud that wrapped around the Hebrew people in the desert, the same one from Solomon's temple, the same one that covered the Virgin. Now on Tabor it wraps around Christ, around the Father present in the voice, around the Spirit present in the light, around Moses, around Elijah, and around the three apostles. Here's an important detail worth noticing. The Shekinah on Tabor has a feature that sets it apart from the one at Sinai. The Sinai cloud was dark, full of thick smoke and thunder. The Tabor cloud comes loaded with light. Matthew says it plainly. A bright cloud, a cloud that shines from within, a cloud that reveals instead of hiding. And here's the great revelation for your departed loved one. God's glory wraps around the glorified dead from the inside. It takes them in, embraces them, holds them, lets them share in its own light, something no light shining from outside could ever manage. It's as if your loved one, the moment they entered the glory of heaven, stepped inside the Shekinah itself, and that divine cloud became their new air, their new home, their new atmosphere, forever. Saint Teresa of Jesus spoke of this experience often in her writing. In the interior castle, she describes how a soul that reaches the deepest union with God feels wrapped in a light that comes from within, a light with no outside source, a light that rises from the very center of the soul because God has taken up residence there. Theologians call this the light of glory. And that light of glory is exactly what your loved one is experiencing right now, if they've already entered heaven. And it's what waits for them at the end of the road, if they're still being purified in purgatory. Think about what that actually means. Your loved one rests inside the bright cloud of Tabor, inside the divine Shekinah, inside the embrace of God that holds them inside and out, far from any dark place, far from any cold grave, far from anything exposed or unsheltered. That's the truth of the Catholic faith about the glorified dead. And that's the great comforting truth August 6th celebrates every single year with special clarity. There's one more thing St. Teresa of Avila said on this subject that offers real comfort. In one of the spiritual testimonies she dictated to her confessors, she says heaven's glory is received as a shared participation in the life of God, never as some individual prize each soul locks away for itself alone. Every saint in heaven shares the same light. Every angel takes part in the same embrace. Every glorified soul is bound to every other, and to Christ, by ties of love so strong, we simply have no comparable experience here on earth. That's why, when your loved one is in glory, they aren't alone. They're in the company of all the saints, in the company of the Virgin, in the company of the angels, and in the company of Christ Himself, who holds them and looks at them with infinite tenderness. And if they're still in purgatory, they're walking toward that same company. Every day brings them closer. Every prayer you offer pushes them one step further along. Every Mass offered for them brings them nearer to that bright shore. And the feast of August 6th, carrying the special weight the Church has given it for more than 500 years, is a day when souls in purgatory receive particular graces. A number of Catholic mystics, among them Saint Veronica Giuliani and Saint Faustina Kowalska, testify to seeing or understanding that on the Lord's great feast days, souls are released from purgatory in greater numbers. The Transfiguration is one of those great feasts. And on August 6th, your offering counts double, counts triple, carries an effectiveness other days might not. When the cloud settles over Tabor, the whole scene shifts. The 3 apostles fall face down on the ground, and in that moment, they hear the voice of the Father. The only time besides Christ's baptism that the Father's voice is heard in the Gospel speaking human words. And what that voice says changes forever the relationship between the living and the dead. Listen to him. That's the word thundering across the summit of Tabor as the bright cloud wraps everything up. The voice of the Father, recorded by all 3 synoptic Gospels with small variations, but ending with the same commanding verb. Matthew 17:5, Mark 9:7, Luke 9:35. This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him, listen to him. The voice of the Eternal Father, spoken over a mountain in Galilee on an ordinary evening sometime around the year 30 or 31 of our era. And that voice is still echoing. Here's something most Catholics have never really sat with. The Father's voice on Tabor wasn't spoken for the 3 apostles alone. It was spoken for all time, for the whole Church, for every generation that would ever be tempted to listen to other voices instead, for the dark centuries of persecution and the bright centuries of the great cathedrals, for your own 21st century. And also, this is the big one, for the souls in purgatory. Saint Teresa of Jesus, in the interior castle, writes in a way that sheds light on this scene. She says a soul still being purified, whether here on earth through penance and prayer or in purgatory after death, hears continuously the voice of Christ calling them, hears in the present tense. With real spiritual hearing, Christ's voice reaches the soul even where the purifying fire is refining it, and that voice is one of the greatest graces the souls in purgatory receive, because they know they're being heard, because they know they still matter, because they know Christ's love reaches into the farthest corner of the world beyond. Think about the soul of your loved one right now while you're hearing this. If they're already in heaven, they hear the Father's voice continuously speaking of the Son, listen to him. And they also hear the Son's voice speaking of the Father and the Spirit, words of communion the human heart can't even begin to picture. If they're still in purgatory, they hear the voice of Christ speaking to them while they're purified. Their soul turns toward that voice the way a sunflower turns toward the sun, because there's no other direction possible once God's love has already marked you from within. And there's more. The Father's voice on Tabor carries a message aimed directly at those still being purified. Listen to him, it says. Listen to Christ. Listen to the beloved Son, because Christ is the one and only mediator between God and mankind, as St. Paul writes in his first letter to Timothy, chapter 2, verse 5. And Christ's mediation reaches the souls in purgatory too. Christ intercedes for them. Christ applies his blood to their purification. Christ hears the prayers you offer for them and turns them into grace that shortens the time of their purifying. That's why Saint Teresa of Avila would have marked August 6th with a cross on the calendar. It's a day the Father's voice rings out with special force over the souls still being purified. A day Christ, transfigured before the eyes of the Church, applies the merits of his passion with particular generosity. A day when many souls in purgatory can be released if the living do their part in faith. This is worth pausing on. A specific question you might be asking yourself right now. What can you actually do on August 6th for your loved one? What concrete action can push them closer to that shore of light? What small, simple gesture can carry enormous weight before God that day? Saint Teresa of Jesus would give her Carmelite sisters 3 pieces of advice, and I'm going to walk through them with you slowly as soon as this thought finishes. Notice first a subtle distinction Saint Teresa of Avila draws in the way of perfection. She separates prayer for the dead offered in a rush from prayer for the dead offered with real attention. The first is like tossing a coin without ever looking at the beggar. The second is like placing the coin in the open palm of the poor man, looking him in the eye, saying his name, wishing him well from the heart. Christ receives both, yes. But the second one, offered with attention, carries an effectiveness far greater because the love driving it is far greater too. Apply this to August 6th. When you say your loved one's name at Mass that day, say it with full attention. When you light a candle for them, watch the flame for a few seconds and offer it for them without letting your mind drift. When you pray an Our Father for their soul, say their full name silently before you begin and say it well. And you'll see how that kind of praying lifts your loved one toward the bright cloud with a force other days simply don't carry. There's one more thing. Saint Teresa of Jesus insisted that the most effective prayers for the dead are the ones joined to the Eucharistic sacrifice. The Holy Mass is the vehicle above all others. No human act carries more power before God than the Mass, because in the Mass, the sacrifice of Christ on the cross is renewed, and the souls in purgatory receive that sacrifice with a hunger we can't even suspect from down here. The Mass on August 6th, with its own proper readings for the Transfiguration, its proper preface, the Gospel of Tabor read aloud from the ambo, is a Mass loaded with particular grace for your departed loved ones. Almost there. What's left is the walk down the mountain and the instructions for the dawn of August 6th. And what's left is learning what to do with your hands, your lips, and your heart, so your loved one receives that great grace. How long did it take them to come down the mountain? One old tradition says the apostles walked behind Christ with their eyes on the ground, unable to look at each other, unable to say a word to one another the whole way down. And Christ ordered them, according to Mark chapter 9, verse 9, not to tell anyone what they had seen until the Son of Man had risen from the dead. And they kept quiet for months, kept quiet for years. They carried that vision inside their chests, the way you'd carry an ember wrapped in ash, waiting for the moment God would give them permission to speak. Saint Teresa of Jesus writes about this discretion of the apostles in several places in her work. She herself was extremely careful with the mystical graces she received. She knew that talking too much about the things of God in front of people not ready to hear them could cause real harm. And she also knew the things of heaven, to bear fruit in the soul, need a period of interior rest, a time of quiet rumination, a time of silence, like wheat that needs the winter under the ground before it can push up in spring. Apply this to the feast of August 6 too. When you feel some interior consolation that day, some sense of closeness with your loved one, some new peace settling into your heart, don't go announcing it to everyone. Hold it. Tuck it inside yourself. Offer it to the Lord in silence, and you'll see that grace grow bigger the less you talk about it. Saint Teresa of Avila puts it in her own words in the book of her life. The Lord's favors, when shared without discretion, wither like cut flowers left out in the sun. And now, the concrete part. What you actually need to do in the order I'm about to give you, so August 6th becomes a day of real grace for your loved one. Take mental note. Write it down if you need to. The first thing is the Holy Mass. That day, or the nearest Sunday, go to Mass and offer it explicitly for the soul of your loved one. When the priest reaches the offertory, the moment the bread and wine are placed on the altar, say your loved one's full name silently within yourself and ask the Lord that the blood of Christ, about to be poured out on that altar within minutes, fall on the soul of that loved one to purify them and carry them to glory. That interior act, made with full attention at the exact moment of the offertory, is one of the most powerful prayers a Catholic can offer for someone who has died. The second thing is a short prayer at dawn on August 6th, before the sun comes up, while the house is still quiet and the morning air comes cold through the half-open window. Kneel down or sit somewhere still. Hold a crucifix or an image of Christ in your hands, and tell the Lord, in your own words, that you want to do what Moses and Elijah did on Tabor, that you want to speak with him about the soul of your loved one. Say the name. Tell Christ who they were, what year they were born, which parish baptized them. Tell him how they died. Tell him about the good they did in life, even the small things. Tell him too about whatever might still need purifying, and ask him to apply on that August 6th the merits of his passion to that soul with special abundance. This prayer, offered before sunrise, carries the strength of a very particular intercession before the throne of God. And third, if you have a Carmelite scapular, a medal of the Virgin, or a treasured image of a saint your loved one was devoted to, kiss it that day the moment you wake up and offer that kiss for them. If you don't have anything like that, a simple sign of the cross made with full attention over your own forehead, lips, and chest, offered for their soul, is enough. A small, plain gesture, almost invisible, but carrying a love that reaches all the way to Christ, and from Christ all the way to the bright cloud where your loved one is waiting. These three gestures, a Mass offered, a dawn prayer with the name spoken aloud, the sign of the cross, or a kiss to something sacred, are exactly what Saint Teresa of Jesus would place in the hands of any widow or mother who asked her what to do on August 6th for someone they'd lost. They're simple. Anyone can do them, and they're effective, with an effectiveness only heaven can measure exactly. Picture the whole scene on Tabor now. Christ at the center, transfigured, wrapped in light. Moses and Elijah on either side, speaking with him about the Exodus in Jerusalem. The bright cloud covering everything. The Father's voice echoing between the mountains. And the three apostles, faces to the ground, hearing the one word that would mark the rest of their lives. Listen to him. Now picture your loved one inside that scene, not some distant bystander, a participant, one of those speaking with Christ, one of those sharing in the light, their name spoken by the lips of the Lord, their soul wrapped in the divine Shekinah, their heart bound to the heart of Christ by ties of love nobody will ever be able to cut. That's the spiritual landscape of August 6th. That's the gift the Church offers every year to everyone who prays for their dead with confidence. And that's the gift Saint Teresa of Avila wanted you to know about before the eve of the feast arrived, so you could get ready calmly, with a name, with prayer, with a Mass offered, and with a heart that's ready. We're almost at the end now. What's left is a grateful look back at what you've heard this afternoon, and the farewell Saint Teresa of Jesus would want to give you from heaven. What you've received in these few minutes of listening is a treasure Saint Teresa of Jesus didn't leave lying out in the open for every Catholic to stumble across. It was tucked into the least read corners of her writing, in the book of her foundations, buried in lines about the nuns who died in her convents. In the Way of Perfection, inside passages about interior silence and mystical consolations. In the Interior Castle, in her descriptions of union with God that came to her after years of suffering and dark nights of the soul. And scattered across letters to Father Gracian, to the Duchess of Alba, to Doña Luisa de la Cerda, and to other spiritual friends. Out of all those sources, what you now carry inside you has been woven together. The enormous certainty that your loved one speaks with Christ. The understanding that Moses and Elijah, that evening on Tabor, were glorified dead with a voice, a mission, a real capacity to intercede, never mere decorations in a gospel painting. The great truths that the divine Shekinah wraps around those who've already gone. The Greek word exodos, hidden away in centuries of translation, that you now understand as the door your loved one walked through the moment they closed their eyes down here. Teresa's teaching on avoiding Peter's mistake with the 3 shelters, how to let go without ever ceasing to love, how to let God do what only God knows how to do with the souls of His own, the steady company of every saint, every angel, the Virgin herself, gathered around your loved one in glory, the particular effectiveness of Masses offered on the great feasts of the liturgical calendar, and the 3 concrete gestures for the dawn of August 6th that are about to turn that date into a day of real grace, felt grace, grace that counts for eternity. All of that is yours now. It belongs to you. Your loved one is in your hands, and there's a way to keep this treasure from settling into nothing more than the passing feeling of one quiet afternoon, a way to turn it into a long road, a sustained spiritual journey, a devotion that grows alongside you in the months ahead. Because a single truth received and left uncared for fades out like a candle forgotten in the corner of a church, with nobody there to relight it. But a truth received and watered with daily prayer grows, deepens, opens into bloom, and bears real fruit in the life of the soul that received it with sincere trust. Think about this. Catholic devotion to the dead carries centuries of accumulated wisdom. It has specific dates on the liturgical calendar that Saint Teresa of Avila knew and used with real skill. It has particular intercessor saints the Church has recognized as special advocates for the souls in purgatory. It has prayers, short devotions, novenas, litanies, medals, scapulars, pious practices handed down generation after generation like sacred inheritance. It has mystical testimonies from women and men who, in prayer, saw what happens to souls on the other side of the veil. It has a theology of the afterlife carefully built up by the great doctors of the Church, from St. Augustine in the 4th century, all the way to the Council of Trent in the 16th. And behind every one of those devotions, every one of those testimonies, lies a deeper understanding of what happens beyond this life with the people we love. Each of those pieces deserves to be known unhurried. Each carries its own weight, its own history, its own effectiveness. And if you, now that you understand what the Transfiguration reveals about your loved one, want to keep going deeper into these mysteries, there are paths opening up ahead of you. Paths that will keep showing you, little by little, other truths tucked away in the writings of Saint Teresa of Jesus. Other dates on the liturgical calendar that carry special weight for your departed. Other saints who intercede with particular force for souls in purgatory. Other mystical revelations great doctors of the Church received, revelations that comfort like almost nothing else on this earth. Paths that will walk alongside you through the coming months of the liturgical year, showing you each great feast with its own meaning, each Marian title with its own grace, each saint on the calendar with their own particular tie to your departed. Notice something. This message you just heard could have reached you at any other moment of your life. It could have found you in your youth, back before you'd lost anyone you loved. It could have found you in old age, once you'd already lost everyone and had less time left to act. But it reached you now, at this exact moment, before August 6th of this year, with enough time to prepare for Mass, to talk to your pastor, to get a scapular, to write your loved one's full name on a slip of paper and tuck it inside your missal, with enough time to live this feast with all the depth it deserves, with enough time to call that sister you haven't spoken to in ages over old family disagreements and ask her to pray together that day for the loved ones you both share, with enough time to set your home in order inside and out before the feast dawns so your own household takes part in the celebration too, And that means something important. It means God wanted, fully and on purpose, for you to hear this. That He arranged for this message to reach your ears precisely today. That He set things up so you'd arrive at August 6th carrying this knowledge in your heart. And if God did this for you, it's because He wants to keep doing it. He wants to keep speaking to you. He wants to keep showing you the paths that lead to your loved one's glory and to your own future glory. He wants you to keep listening, keep learning, keep walking this spiritual road that's opened up in front of you the way that bright cloud opened over the apostles on Tabor. There's more still waiting to be known. There's another truth hidden in the writings of Saint Teresa of Avila that sheds light on another date on the calendar, another sacred moment when your loved one can receive extraordinary help from this side of the veil. And there's a way for that truth to reach you with the same closeness, the same calm, the same voice of a friend walking beside you. A way for the conversation between your heart and the spiritual world to keep opening up without interruption, day after day, week after week, until death loses the bitter taste it can still sometimes carry. Don't let this moment end here. Let the conversation between your soul and Christ and between your loved one and Christ keep opening. Let this August 6th be the first of many days of real grace for your own. Let the next message that reaches your ears be just as concrete, just as illuminating as the one you just heard, arriving at exactly the moment your soul is ready to receive it. And with that, it's time to say goodbye. Notice how well everything fits together in God's plan. You began listening today with an aching heart, carrying a quiet question inside you. And now you're ending with a certainty no doubt can shake. Your loved one speaks with Christ. Your loved one is wrapped in the divine Shekinah. Your loved one takes part in heaven's conversation, their name spoken there. And August 6th is the feast the Church sets aside to remind us year after year of this great and comforting truth. Saint Teresa of Jesus once wrote in the book of her life that God uses good friends to carry souls to the shore of heaven. A good friend is someone who walks with you all the way to the door. A good friend is someone who says goodbye with a trembling blessing on their lips, trusting quietly that God will keep walking with you once the friend has gone on to their rest. May Christ, transfigured on Tabor, wrap your loved one right now in His bright cloud. May the Father speak over them the word, "Listen to Him," with the same force He spoke it over the Son that evening. May Moses and Elijah and all the glorified saints make room beside them in heaven's conversation. May Our Lady of Mount Carmel, Mother of the departed, spread her mantle over them and over you. And may the peace of Christ, the deep peace no human words can describe, the peace that surpasses all understanding, settle over your heart tonight like a small bright cloud and never leave you. Amen. Amen now and always, in the most holy name of the Father,